Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Petros from Vakis, the director of the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. I'm very happy to welcome everybody back. This is our first event on this Thursdays at the Eastern Mediterranean that we've started about a year ago. And today we have a distinct pleasure to have an old friend and a contributor to the program from last year, and somebody that really knows the area very, very well. Professor, Doctor, Mr. Journalist of extraordinaire, Mustafa Fetouri. But I'm going to pass the baton to the capable hands of Leila Grades and Natalie Gevorgian of the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. And I'm looking forward to the next hour of presentation, discussion, and back and forth. So welcome, grab your lunch and listen and enjoy this great conversation. Leila, Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Bombakis. So we will introduce our speaker, and then we can have the initial presentation by the speaker, which will be followed by the Q&A portion. And you can leave your questions in the chat box as we go, and we will address them afterwards. And at this time, I would like to introduce our speaker, who is Mr. Mustafa Fetouri, who is a Libyan academic and freelance journalist. He is a recipient of the EU's Freedom of the Press Prize.
And then he's also written for newspapers such as El Monitor and Middle East Monitor. So we're very lucky to have you here today. Thank you for being here, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm glad to be back. We did something almost a year ago, last March, and I really enjoyed the debate and the discussion as well. And here we are doing something again this year, but I have a problem here with the splitting the screen. So I have to find how to do that. All right. Oh, I guess you can't see me now, huh? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, but now, Petros, if I go to the slides, you can't see me, huh?
Natalie, can you allow the sharing, please?
Yes, yeah. we actually just allowed it for Mr. Fetouri to do it.
Okay, you should be able to do it, Mustafa.
And we'll still be able to see you
if
you share your screen.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes,
I can see you.
Okay, but I can't see you. Something is wrong.
Can you see your slides?
Well, I can see the slides only, but I can't see something else.
You should have the feature of share screen, and when you share the screen, your picture just would be in a small box in the corner.
I know, but I can't find the share screen. Where is it?
It's at the bottom. It's in green.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now I got it. All right. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a nice day over here, and I hope it's not very cold over there as well. As Petros have said, you know, with what is going on in Ukraine, it might be a very good idea. We are doing this about the Arab Maghreb Union in North Africa, and I would start by saying that countries usually go to special or more comparative, if you like, arrangements, because such arrangement, regional or international, they serve either their own interests in some kind of way, or they just serve the general purpose of being together, living in peace. And what is going on in Ukraine, if we take that into example, this is one of those examples whereby arrangements have actually failed. to bring together some kind of peaceful coexistence, regardless of what we think about the specifics of the situation in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. But anyway, one of those arrangements is what is called the Arab Maghreb Union, which was initiated back in 1989 to bring together the 5 North African countries, as we can see here. This is the general map of the Union. With the green areas, you see Libya, Tunisia, and then Algeria, as well as Morocco and Mauritania, which is, Mauritania is not really in the Mediterranean, but the rest of them do have coastal lines along the Mediterranean. And the area we're referring to is extending from all the way from Libya's eastern borders with Egypt to the Atlantic Ocean. So quite a large area and quite interesting arrangement. The union used to be known by its French abbreviation, which is UAM, Union Arab de Morocco. And then we have the specific political map of the union itself. We have the countries more clearly here. And then we have on the left here, in the Atlantic, this is the Western Sahara. We left it in white because it's disputed area to a certain extent between Morocco and Algeria. And also it has become a trap of the union itself, if you like, whereby it has the dispute over this area, this strip of the desert, has been a kind of the main hurdle before the AMU, making any progress almost impossible, especially over the last 20 years, 30 years or so, since it was created actually 33 years ago. I'm trying to, I tried to divide up the presentation into 2 parts. In part 1, I will have a look at the basic information about the union, when it was created, the founding members, who they are, and the leaders and the countries, as well as geography and the economics, the population, average age, religion, ethnicity, and economic resources, and all these 4 countries, and what actually brought them together, and why Egypt, for example, which is also in North Africa, was left out. We will try to answer that later on. So the union itself was founded in the Moroccan city of Marrakesh on the 17th of February, 1989, 33 years ago. And the agreement bringing it to life was signed by the leaders of Algeria, Mauritania, Morocco, Libya, Tunisia at the time. Of course, the Western Sahara, as I mentioned earlier, because its problem, was not included as a signatory to the founding agreement, on the hope that the new union, AMU, will be able to solve that problem, and then whatever comes out will be included in the union itself, whether it's independent state, which is very unlikely, or it becomes part of Morocco. And the guys who signed that agreement are Shadli bin Jadid, who died in 2012. He was the president of Algeria. Muayyar Ould Sidi Ahmed al-Taya, who used to be at the time the president of Mauritania. He was overthrown in the military coup. And then now he lives in Qatar, where he teaches in the military academy. And then the Moroccan king, Hassan II, or Hassan II, as they say in French, And then Muammar Gaddafi, who was overthrown in a revolt held by NATO in 2011, Libya. And then Zain al-Abidin bin Ali, who was the first victim, if you like, of the Arab Spring in Tunisia. And he lived the rest of his life between 2011 and 2019 in Saudi Arabia as a political asylum. And then he died in 2019 in Saudi Arabia. And this is the one picture that is very much associated with the AMU itself, because it shows the leaders of the 5 countries as right after they signed the agreement in Marrakesh. And it became the symbol of the whole project. And of course, all those guys, 5 guys, are not there anymore. As I said, we look at the basic information because I guess most of you probably don't know about the AMU. For you, maybe it never existed because there isn't even smallest trace of it in the news around for the last 30 years or so, because the union itself, while it's still the agreement creating it is still there, but nothing is happening actually. Nothing has been happening, including at the level of the experts. There are no meetings, no implementation of any agreements signed, and so on and so forth. And of course, the summit council of the union itself never met actually after I guess 1994. Anyway, the total area is quite massive. It's over 6 million square kilometers. The population, the latest figures we have it's about 100 million plus without Egypt, of course, which is not a member, and I will explain later on why it's not a member. And the average age is 26 years old in those 5 countries, which means they have really great potential in terms of human resources. Should they choose to develop the union, as well as build the better education systems across the 5 countries. Most of the people are Sunni Muslims, and with minorities of Jews, especially in Morocco. And then we get some Christians in Algeria, as well as Morocco, but very small numbers, really. And ethnically speaking, you have mostly the Arabs and the Berber, as well as another branch of the Berber who like themselves to be called the Qaili in northeastern Algeria specifically. And I mentioned that because of the fact, I'll come back to this later on, because it's an issue coming back again. It has never been an issue before, but it is now. And then the economic resources, the gross GDP of the 5 countries, 1.5 trillion US dollars. Most of the natural resources are gas, oil and gas, and phosphate and agriculture. Oil and gas is actually Algeria and Libya are the main producers of oil and gas in North Africa and in the Union itself. Now, as development, and more technology and exploration is happening in the area, we see also Tunisia is trying to get some oil from both its sea lion and what they call the exclusive economic zone in the Mediterranean Sea, as well as southwest in the desert of the Tunisian desert. And the main agricultural producers in North Africa, in the Union actually, are again Tunisia and Morocco. Of course, Algeria and Libya do produce a lot of agricultural products, but in fact they are not even self-sufficient. So they import a lot of stuff from outside, particularly from Tunisia, Turkey, and Egypt sometimes. And that's one of the hurdles of the union. It has not been able to stimulate the trade between the 5 member states, including or excluding Egypt, but the trade between the bilateral trade, I should say, between Libya and Tunisia, for example, or Libya and Tunisia and Algeria is very good and has been going on for decades now. It's quite interesting to watch how trade is going very well bilaterally, but as a group, it's failing. That's why sometimes it's very funny. You end up finding a Tunisian product in Algeria, but it's not coming from Tunisia next door. Actually, it's coming from France. It was exported by Tunisia to France, like olive oil, for example, and ended up imported by Algeria, which is next door to Tunisia. And then in part 2, we'll try to look at the union and the regional context, why it was created and what are the benefits and downside of it, as well as in the international context, whereby we compare it probably to other similar groupings, blocks of trade, for example, in Asia and North America. And then we see if there are any achievements and why the dream is deferred, as we say in the main title of the presentation. And we ask the question if the union itself is dead, and if it's so, why? And are there any kind of hopes, that it could be revived again or rebuilt? Well, it has to be from scratch, I guess. And the second part, which is the interesting part, other than the basic facts about the block itself, the AMU was intended actually, as a trading bloc more than political union that brings the 5 countries together in North Africa. So, but even as a trading bloc, it did not really work very well. But in the regional context, we see, for example, in 1957, when the union did not exist and most of the countries in North Africa were not independent. At that time, it was only Morocco and Tunisia as independent states. The rest, Algeria was under French occupation, while Libya was an Italian colony. So in 1957, the European Economic Community started out with the small things like the union of the steel industry, for example, and moved on to become what it is today, a huge trade bloc, probably the fourth largest economy, I should say, in the world. And it became a kind of a superpower in Europe itself, with all the benefits you can associate with that. And one of them is the collective security for the entire continent. And this has been manifesting itself incidentally in what is happening in Ukraine today, and what has been going on in that region, part of Europe, over the last 3 months or so. So in 1958, the first seed was of the union itself was considered or sowed into the ground, of course, I should say, by independent Morocco and Tunisia and Tangier in Morocco. It was looked at and then by those who were involved in the initial meetings. Most of them were actually political parties rather than representative of their own states, with the exception of Tunisia. More or less the Sturian party, which was in power at the time in Tunisia, was also represented at the meeting in Tangier. And but it was looked at more or less as a reaction to the emerging EU or EEC, as it was known at the time, because the proximity between North Africa and Europe, of course, were very close to each other in terms of geography. And we have a lot of things together that bring us together, the northern part of Africa, as well as especially the southern part of Europe. So the idea of forming the AMU was looked at within this regional context. But as we can compare today, the EU has moved on, as I said, to become a very large and effective union in terms of defense, trade, movement of people, movement of capital, shared information, and we have seen this firsthand experience in terms of sharing vaccines, for example, against the coronavirus, and so on and so forth. While the AMU was completely forgotten, and even during the pandemic, especially last year, especially in 2020, when it was very serious issue across most of the countries in South Africa, with the exception more or less of Morocco, the 5 countries failed to do anything together, even in trying to vaccinate their people or negotiate as one bloc to get better deals for acquiring the vaccines itself at better rates or prices. And this led to the fact that most of them, each one actually, had to negotiate in itself, by itself, with the producers of the vaccine. And this led to very high prices. For example, the Libyan government got the Russian vaccine from Moscow. The Russian vaccine was advertised. The advertised price was $9.99 US dollars. But actually, because of the weak negotiating position of Libya as one country negotiating with the producers, they had to pay $26. So that's twice more or something. And we have another example, which is the 1975 Economic Community of West African States, known as ECOWAS. ECOWAS now is, started only in 75. Compared to the AMU, we could say it's very successful. It has very effective, organizational structure, and they cooperate with each other almost in everything. And they also doing very well in terms of economic integration, opening the borders and free movement of people and the capital as well, and the bilateral defense across countries, as well as a group, ECOWAS group. And we have seen the group, for example, taking very strict, if you like, and very swift positions when it comes to a good example of that will be Mali, when it comes to military coups in the area. So we have seen how they expelled Mali because of the military coup. They did the same in Burkina Faso, and they only readmit countries into the grouping after things have been corrected in terms going back to the civil state and organizing elections and handing over power peacefully and so on and so forth. And the other good example may be NAFTA, which used to be called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the North American countries, United States, Canada, and Mexico. But then it was Mr. Trump didn't like the name, and they changed it to USMCA, which is US, Mexico, and Canada. Of course, it was not only a matter of name, but there were some kind of differences between the United States, especially the United States and Canada, over issues of some tariffs and things like this, especially to do with the steel, I think, if I remember correctly. So comparing all those regional blocks, which also started as trade blocks, more or less, and they continue to be as such as trade blocks, comparing them to the Arab Maghreb Union, we see the huge difference between the two. What really paralyzed what did the Arab Maghreb Union so far actually achieve? Unfortunately, it's very little. There's ease of movement. I wouldn't say, open borders or open skies between the 5 countries, for example, in terms of travel. But there is ease of movement, if you like, but that is at the bilateral level. For example, we Libyans, we used to travel when the union was set up back in '89. 2 years later, or a year later, I think, we started to be allowed to travel to Tunisia with only our national ID. We don't even need a passport. We could bring back whatever we bring back from Tunisia without paying any duties to neither the Tunisian nor the Libyan custom sites, and so on and so forth. Small gains like this, but none of that continued, unfortunately. And I think the whole thing stopped. This type of free movement, or ease of movement, as I call it, I think it was stopped very quickly by 1992, 93, just a few years later. Of course, nobody ever, explains what's happening in terms of governments. The governments don't really come out and say what is happening. For example, why Libyans are not, or Tunisian for that matter, cannot go to Libya as they used to be in 1991 or 1990. So it's just, they overlook the issue. But most of the whole thing, becomes paralyzed specifically because of politics. We do not, our leaders, unfortunately, at the time and still today, are not very good in separating politics from everything else. So we let the political disagreements and quarrels between political leaders as well as countries, spoil the whole thing for the rest of the people. So millions of people looking for, to visit their relatives in the other country. For example, we have inter-family relationships between Tunisians and Libyans. A lot of mixed families, if you like. You would find half of the family in Libya and the other half in Tunisia. The same thing goes for Morocco and Algeria. Very little between Algeria and Tunisia, but thousands of mixed marriages between Algeria and Morocco. Yet the borders have been closed for the better part of the last 20 years or so. We don't have a serious border closures between Tunisia and Libya. That's true. Movement has been always smooth, but there are instances when the borders are locked, and sometimes you are locked in Tunisia because you have been there. You came from Libya visiting your uncles or brothers or whatever, and then you are going back home the next day, driving your car, and you can't cross the borders because of the closure for whatever reason that might be, but it's always politics, of course. What is the main problem with the union itself? Well, the main problem, as I mentioned before, has to do with the Western Sahara. Here in this map, the green area on the left here, this is the Western Sahara. It's disputed between Morocco in the north and Algeria in the north and the northeast. Algeria actually is not a part of the issue directly, but Algeria is the main supporter of the Liberation Front that is trying to take over Western Sahara of Morocco, while Morocco complaining and claiming the area as part of its own national territory. And of course, the actual conflict between the two goes back to the early 1970s, long before the Union was founded. And when Spain, which is across over there, across the Mediterranean from Morocco, when Spain used to be the colonial power in the Western Sahara, and most of the fight in this over this desert strip actually has to do with phosphate, because the area is very rich in phosphate, as well as fishing in the Atlantic. So that is the main difficulty actually. And because of the disagreements between Algeria as supporter of the Polisario Front, known as the Polisario Front, that is fighting to claim the Western Sahara of Morocco. Because of this issue, Algeria and the Algerian Moroccan relations have always been in trouble, and the borders between them, most of the time they are closed, as I mentioned. And then lately we have another factor which complicated the relations between Algeria and Morocco a little bit more, making it very unlikely that the AMU will ever, in the foreseeable future, be revived and come to life again. That factor I refer to, Mr. Trump, the US former president, before he left the White House, in just the last 3 weeks of his presidency, decided to recognize the sovereignty of Morocco over the Western Sahara. And not just that, he also ordered the opening of an American general consulate in the Western Sahara. Actually, it's a desert. It's very unlikely that anybody will come over for consular services in that part of the world, especially American citizens. Nobody's there. But why did he do this? It's a very symbolic, decision. But why did he do it? Well, he did it because he wanted the Abraham Accords, which were signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates Far East in the Gulf region, to normalize ties between the two countries. He wanted that accord to be signed again also by Morocco. And he said to the Moroccans, okay, if you do this, if you normalize ties with Israel according to the Abraham Accords, then I will recognize your sovereignty over the Western Sahara. Of course, that's the whole thing. I mean, that's what any government, any Moroccan government or king really wants, that the United States recognize the sovereignty of Morocco over the Western Sahara, and they did it according to this. This, of course, further complicated the bilateral relations between Algeria and Morocco, because Algeria is very unhappy about the fact that Israel, they call it Algerians. They say now Israel is on our doorstep, and they are sworn enemy of Israel, as you might know. So that further complicated any attempt to be made, if anybody is interested in the future of the Union to come back to life and start working again. It's very unlikely in the next decade or so. And because of this issue, the issue of the normalization of ties between Israel and Morocco, we were supposed to have the Arab Summit in Algeria next month in March, but it was already postponed indefinitely. Of course, they say because of the coronavirus, but you can always have a summit, virtual summit. You don't have to come in person. But that's not the reason. The reason is the Israeli factor, which is new in the area, and new in North Africa. Well, it's not very new, but kind of new, because we know Algeria, Morocco, for example, has always maintained some kind of secret relations with Israel because of the minority Jews population in Morocco itself, and the king has always maintained a kind of advisor, a Jewish advisor in his courts. So well, these are the most important points, but I would like also to point out the other reasons that made the union fail like it did. The main one, actually, it's the flawed and weak agreement. The agreement itself that created the union in 1989 was not very, if you like, legally written, if you like, because it does not, for example, it does not provide any conditions or reasons for any country that wishes to leave the union. If you when you do that in creating trade blocks or political unions, when you leave the door open according to certain conditions that anybody could leave the union or the grouping, whatever it is, you make it easier for the union to survive, you know, with the rest of the group. And that person or that country, in this case, could always come back again. And we have seen this happening in the European Union, the early stages of creating the European Union. Some countries left and then they came back again. And we have seen the UK leaving the EU. There will be a time, probably, we never know, that the UK maybe in 10 years comes back again. So, but that is always embedded in the agreement that created the EU itself. We don't have that mechanism in the agreement that created the Arab Maghreb Union, and this is a very serious problem. Also, the political border quarrels between different states. We have this particularly a problem between Algeria and Morocco over their own borders, their own shared borders. Not just over the Western Sahara strip of land, but also the borders between the two sides. We did have the same thing between Tunisia and Libya, but that was sorted out, I think, 25 or 30 years ago. Mutually between the two countries, they agreed to go to the World Court and settled the whole thing over there, and they respected the borders between them. While the same thing did not happen in between Algeria and Morocco. I said earlier that I will come back to the issue of the ethnicity, because after the so-called Arab Spring of 2011, as I mentioned, we already have minorities of the Berber and Qabaili, specifically in Algeria. Some people say they are part of the Berber nation, and others say no, they are not. Anyway, but we have the Berber in all four countries, with the exception of Mauritania. So we have them in Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. With different, percentages of the overall population count of the population of each country. In Libya, very small, as well as Tunisia. The number becomes bigger in Algeria, and then, of course, the biggest is in Morocco. But after 2011, before 2011, the issue of the Berber or minorities in general, whether religious or ethnicity or whatever, has never been an issue in these countries. You would have, complaints about small things like, for example, what kind of names people should use for their children to register them in the national register, for example, in Libya or in Algeria, because some countries, especially Libya, does not allow an Arabic names that are not Arabic to be registered. So, but they remain limited. Few small number of people would complain about this, but it has never been an issue of identity. After 2011, it became an issue of identity. And because it's becoming increasingly an issue of identity, encouraged by foreign countries, especially France, it touches the union as well. And they start with, they complain, the Berber, for example, they complain about the name itself, Arab Maghreb Union. They say they claim the whole area shouldn't be called the Arab Maghreb Union, but it should be called the Maghreb Union or something else without the word Arab, because they say, according to them, they are the original indigenous people of the area, and they consider themselves to be non-Arab. Of course, you have all these new things, trends in the area that's spoiling everything, including smaller things like, for example, holy shrines in Algeria or in Libya, whereby we always recognize them as a shrine of some kind of a Muslim saint, for example. After 2011, they become, some of them, at least in Zwara in Western Libya, it's a disputed thing, whether it's, okay, it's a Muslim, some kind of a Muslim saint was buried there or he lived there and we have the shrine for him to remember him. Okay, that's fine. But then was he an Arab or a Berber? We never asked these questions before 2011. But now, of course, with all the trends you have in the area, it's becoming an issue and it's affecting, poisoning, I would say. It's poisoning the whole thing, the whole social fabric in these countries, specifically and Libya and Algeria. The issue of the Berber in Morocco is far less serious problem because I guess it's a very large community. Their count is in the millions, where in Libya they are a few thousands. And because of that, because of the size of the population that is already Berber in Morocco, the kingdom have taken a very long strategy, a long time strategy, whereby it started implementing certain steps as early as 1960s and 1970s to make sure that people become Moroccans instead of Berber and Arab. And they succeeded to a certain extent in that. So you have the education system, for example, adjusted to accommodate the Berber people, their tradition and their way of life and so on and so forth. It's not the same in the other countries, and there are various reasons behind this. And my point here is that it is also affecting not only the social cohesion, if you like, inside each of the countries, but also the overall getting together of the whole 5 countries. Could we say, after all this, could we say that the union, AMU, is dead? Well, it depends how you look at it. If you look at it from the point of view of the ordinary people in Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Western Sahara, including Western Sahara, Morocco, they would love to have the union working, and they would love to have a freedom of movement between these countries. They would like very much to be able to visit their relatives in Algeria, or Algerians visiting their brothers and sisters and mothers sometimes in Morocco, and the same thing for Tunisia, Algeria, Tunisia, and so on and so forth. But that's a political issue. So it's not, we the people have never been asked what we think about it as a union. Do we want it or we don't? Of course, when you look at the way of life and what is happening in the ground, of course we want it. But we have never had the opportunity as a people to contribute to the idea itself in terms of having a referendum, for example, over certain things. When they open the borders, what kind of documents you should use, and to cross the borders, the inter-borders, I mean, in the area, and so on and so forth. But the question is again, is it that? Well, if you speak politically speaking, despite the fact that the General Secretariat of the union itself still exists in Rabat in Morocco, and different institutions, which are the building blocks of the union itself, still exist in Libya and Tunisia, and some are in Algeria. We have departments, for example, for agriculture, departments for departments for sports, education, and so on and so forth. You name it, just like the union, the EU itself. But most of them are paralyzed mainly because of the politics, mainly again because of the problems between Algeria and Tunisia, and difference between Algeria and Morocco, sorry, mainly over the Western Sahara Desert. So what I wanted to say really, you know, in terms of institutions itself, working institutions, it is almost dead. There are people still there working, they get paid every month and so on, but nothing is happening. But in terms of the idea itself and the people who believe in it, like I said, over 100 million people who believe in it is still alive. And hopefully one day it could come back. Why? Well, we have the example of the EU and what's happening with Ukraine right now. With such blocks, you have better economic relations and less possibilities of war. You reduce the risk of war. And we have to remember here, the European Union itself, in a way, one of the reasons behind creating the European Economic Community, which became the European Union, unified countries and everything, one of the reasons behind it was to prevent another war in Europe. Like the Second World War, which started in Europe, actually. Well, I'll stop here, and I hope to be able to answer any questions. I hope you enjoyed the whole thing.
Thank you so much. We do have a few questions. First, I guess just going in the direction on the subject you were just talking about. Do you believe the Union misses having a strong actor in the region, similar to Germany and France for the European Union?
I did not hear the first part. Do I believe? I'm sorry?
Yeah, do you, in your opinion, do you think that the Union misses having a strong actor in the region, similar to Germany and France for the European Union?
That's a very good question. I really think so, yes. I mean, you really have to have a kind of a leader, not only among people, small group of people, but also among countries. Yeah, the countries, sometimes small countries like Libya, they have to have a symbolic figure, if you like, to bring them together. One of the things we are missing in Libya, and that's why we have been in trouble for the last decade or so, and we continue to be in trouble since 2011, is that we do not have a symbolic leadership that can rally the people behind it. So in terms of countries, it's the same thing. I think we are missing this. Algeria was at one point, qualified to play this role in the area, but because of its problems with Morocco, both of them failed in doing so. And the other qualified country in terms of size and resources and knowledge and so on is also Morocco. But again, because of problems with Algeria, it cannot play such a role. And Morocco lately has been much more interested in developing its relations with the Europeans across the Mediterranean more than with its neighbors to the east. Yes, please.
Sure. So I have one question, and I guess it goes on off of what is happening currently in the world. Before we saw, like last year during COVID, we saw a lot of activity from Russia, especially in regards to what was happening in Libya. Do you think with like the recent invasion of Ukraine, we will see less active Russia in Libya, or do you think Russia will continue being present in Libya?
Well, I think the question of Ukraine is not an issue for the Russians, given the resources Russia has, and actually I see Russia expanding in the whole of Africa. Starting from Libya southwards. And we already have Russian forces underground in Mali. They are replacing the French, which is something unthinkable just a few years ago, that Russia will come to take the place of France and a former French colony like Mali. Sorry, they did it again in the CAR, Central African Republic, south of Mali, of course, and they are still in Libya. Of course, in the case of Libya, they always deny their presence there. They say the fighters who are there, they are mercenaries, Russian mercenaries indeed, but they are not under the control of the government. But that's not true. Of course, the Wagner group, which brings those people into countries like Libya, they were in Ukraine, of course, they are in Syria, they are in Mali now, and the CAR Republic, the Central African Republic, is actually very close to Mr. Putin, very close to the Kremlin itself. So I don't think it will limit the potentials for Russia to expand its presence in Africa, not just in Libya. And the other thing that helps in this regard, helps the Russians in this regard, is the fact that Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and it has the veto powers inside the council. So anything that does not please them will not pass the Security Council. And when anything does not pass the Security Council, it does not get implemented. Whatever you decide in the United Nations, if it does not pass through the Security Council without being objected to by veto power, like Russia or the United States or France, it remains just a piece of paper, meaningless. Yes, please.
And then another question, in your opinion, when do you think elections will happen in Libya?
Well, that's, it's a quite difficult thing to predict. We were supposed to have the elections last December 24th, but of course it did not work. And actually, the planned presentation, I think it was around that time, I was supposed to be talking about the elections, but of course, none of them happened. No, the presentation did not take place, and the elections, of course, did not take place. I think there will be, I could, with 90% certainty say that there will never be elections in 2022 in Libya. And hopefully that it will happen next year, because there are certain issues that make it quite difficult this year. One of them is the disagreement between the parliament itself as well as the Supreme Council, Higher Council of State, over issues that have to do with the laws governing the election and how they are supposed to be run and so on, and who's eligible to contest the elections and so on and so forth. So if we are lucky as Libyans, I think we will be able to have elections probably in the summer of 2023. Yes, please.
You guys have a question?
Oh, wait. We do have, yes, we have one more question. Do you think Algeria and Morocco will ever come together and open their borders? Is the question.
Well, I think, it's always there. This is a political issue. It has nothing to do with any other thing, and the reason, for opening the borders are much more than the reasons to close them. But as I mentioned, the only factor that has changed in the region between Algeria and Morocco is the new presence of the Israelis in Morocco through the normalization of relations between the two countries and the trade agreements and defense agreements Morocco signed with the Israelis. That's the only factor. Everything else remains the same as it was 10 years ago. So will they come together? Of course, I think they will in terms of opening the borders, but it's very difficult to say when. Algeria now has a new president. You know, he doesn't belong to the old elite, if you like, that run Algeria since independence in the 1960s until just 2 years ago. He probably has a different idea about the region and the relations between Algeria and Morocco, and it's hope that he will come up with some kind of compromises to compromise with Morocco in terms of at least opening the borders. Yes, please.
So on that point, I mean, I'm going to jump in. Like on that point, then there's the issue of the Western Sahara, which seems to be a divisive issue for Algeria and Morocco. And it's, I like the reference to the European Union and how the Germany factor. And then, of course, you have the German-France factor and Alsace-Lorraine, which seem to be divided them. But then the whole coal and steel becomes, can the phosphorus, can we have a phosphorus agreement that, builds on the Maghreb Union in the future? So like what divides, can it unite?
Well, it's feasible, but I think what is really lacking in our region is the political will. Most of when you look at the problems that created the hurdles for the union to go forward and move forward, they are very minor issues. They are not big issues. And why the borders, for example, were closed between Algeria and Morocco? There isn't any serious security incident or cross-border terrorism or any of that. Actually, closing the borders encourages trafficking of contrabands, trafficking of people, trafficking of drugs, trafficking, you name it. But when you keep the borders open, you can control what crosses the borders actually, and you get money as a state, as duties paid and things people bring into each other's country. So there is always a way to do it if you have the political will in place, and we are lacking this. And we don't even look at the issue as the Europeans did, from the larger picture. As I mentioned earlier, some of the reasons behind creating the European Union was actually to preempt any kind of differences between countries that might create some kind of prejudice, long-term prejudice in the future that might develop into war or something, especially between Germany and France. And we fail, our leaders, unfortunately, fail to see this. And as they did with the creation, the agreement of itself, the agreement itself that created the union has so many flaws, and I just highlighted one of them. One of the reasons, it make it difficult for anybody to accept the union or make it activate it, actually, it doesn't have any clue in the agreement itself that says, well, if you want to leave, okay, you leave according to this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can come back if you want to come back. It doesn't exist. So it's, what brings us together, simply stated, what brings us together is much more than what keeps us apart. Yes.
So in that sense, then the hope is it is a dream deferred rather than a dream gone. So like there is that process, the evolutionary process moving forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What is interesting, to note, Petrus, over the last decade, especially in the early years of the year after Arab Spring, I mean between 2011 and 15, across the region, whether in Libya, Algeria, Tunisia, especially Libya and Tunisia, were the hardest hit by the so-called Arab Spring. The Maghreb Union was always in the minds of people. We had lots of workshops, and like before, about the idea itself. We had debates in universities, cross high schools as well, where people talking about the union, unlike before. We also had between countries visits for students, high school students, and summer schools in Tunisia for Libyans, and vice versa. When the security situation allows, of course, just for a week or something, we will go there and visit and meet each other. And the idea of the AMU is always there, which means regardless of what the political elite think or do, which means that the hope is still there. And we could easily say it's not a dream gone, as you said, but a dream deferred. Maybe in a few years' time, maybe longer, we will have the union. But also, there will be a time, I believe, when leadership, political leadership in the region will believe, the new leaders, breed of leaders, a new breed of leaders will discover that actually having the union is not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity for survival.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it's not just an issue of aesthetics, but it's an issue of practical need. And I think you're absolutely right in the fact that it seems that we have a lot of these copycat kind of like, unions that have been created, whether it's like Mercosur or West African Union or the Maghreb Union, the ASEAN countries, but they have been sort of like mimicking from the top down rather than the process from the bottom up and without the history of it. So you also need to like the evolutionary process to catch up to it. So it's a very interesting kind of a connection that you make. But I think there's might be another question in there. So
yes, I was actually going to say we have one more question, our last question. It says, can you elaborate on the Green March and how it may or may not affect the West Sahara issue today?
Well, the Green March is about the Western Sahara, and it's Morocco's strongest, if you like, argument against those who say Western Sahara should be an independent state or self-ruled state or whatever. The Green March, as we know, it was a kind of a popular march led by the late king, King Hassan II, when the Spanish were leaving the Western Sahara. As I mentioned, they were the colonial power. And it was, started by the king himself, the government at the time, where people drove cars, walked rode bicycles and walked all the way from Morocco to the Western Sahara in the south to claim the land peacefully as part of Morocco. And ever since, the Moroccan narrative about the Sahara has always been, we liberated the Sahara through the Green March. So I hope we can see in the near future another Green March, instead of coming out of Morocco only, but coming from all 5 North African countries and meeting in the Western Sahara and dismantling the whole borders between them and reactivating the union again. Then within the union itself, you could solve the problem of the Sahara, as we have seen in Europe, whether the European Union, while each country, each region, even regions in Europe today, maintain their identity and their character and their social fabric and the way they want it to be and the way it used to be, but they are still within the European Union. We could do the same. And through another Green March, I really hope for that. Yes, please.
I think we're right up against the clock, and I couldn't thank you enough. I mean, as always, very informative, really opening up our audience and to a part of the world that we don't pay that much attention to, and if we do, we pay attention to it in the wrong way. And I think looking at it in the way that you presented it this afternoon. And the possibilities there of a Maghreb Union. I think there are very few people that really talk about it in a wide sense, and there are very few people that are even aware of it. And I think it was very, very engaging, intriguing, and food for thought for those of us that are also taking in our lunch and maybe also had some food for thought as well. So I couldn't thank you enough, and for your contributions and the friendship to the program overall, and bringing awareness to the Eastern and wider Mediterranean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure always to be part of any program you have, Petrus, and I thank the young ladies as well, and look forward to next time we do something together.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody, and see us back again next week. I think at 3:30 we are showing the film Utica, A Last Refuge. Is about refugees that have resettled in the United States. Join us at 3:30 next week here in the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. Good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.